Hey there. It's weekly roundup time. You may notice that I am very lonely. I am David Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect, and I am here alone. Now, I'll take you behind the scenes of the Prospect to explain why I am here alone. Only for the first half of the show. We are going to have a guest in the second half. Um, we are kind of on deadline for our next print issue. So the staff is working very hard, wrapping up their print pieces. And as such, people are relatively unavailable for the roundup this week. One of the people on that deadline is myself. I am taking time out for the audience here to get this done, to do the roundup because it's important. It's an important week. Um, in the second half of the show, we're going to have Matt Stoller from the American Economic Liberties Project. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. The U.S. versus Google trial ended, or is in the midst of ending, I guess, this week with closing arguments. There was a case by the FTC involving Pioneer Resources, an oil company being bought by Exxon, that has some interesting twists to it. Maybe we'll talk about Live Nation and their attempts to buy Washington. So that'll be in the second half of the show. The first half of the show, I definitely want, obviously with me being here all by my lonesome, I want to hear from you, the audience. So if you're out there, if you're on the roundup right now, if you're listening on YouTube, if you're watching, come ask a question. Give me something you want to hear me talk about, and I'd be happy to do so. So we'll monitor that, and if we have questions, we will definitely get to those. The first thing, I guess, I think it would be important to talk about is what's been happening on college campuses. I'm here in Los Angeles. The week began with protests at USC. The middle of the week was punctuated by basically a raid on the protest encampment at UCLA, followed by a police dismantling of that encampment. And this is obviously something we've seen all across the country. Students who are protesting both the war in Gaza and their institutions' inclusion, in their view, in the war by funneling parts of their endowment, investing in companies that do business in Israel. Maybe you could relate it to the boycott, divestment, and settlement movement. Clearly, they want, or boycott, divestment, and sanctions, I think. Clearly, they want these colleges to divest from these companies that do business. This has been kind of a watershed week in terms of this, what we've been talking about for months here on the roundup about the war and Americans' reaction to this war, particularly young people, particularly students. I have a couple thoughts, some of which I put in a piece this week. If you go to prospect.org, and wrote about the sort of relationship between these encampments, these student protests, and the sort of crushing of dissent on campus, crushing of First Amendment rights to speech, and the 10-year effort, which only ended this week, from students on a different campus, a for-profit college campus, a series of for-profit college campuses known as the Art Institutes. Students who were sold a bill of goods. They were told that they can take these classes, get needed skills in their particular fields, in this case, in the arts, the visual arts, the performing arts, and apply those skills and actually get jobs. They were told that as a function of getting in and taking out as much debt to get into these schools as possible. And it turns out they were lied to. They were lied to repeatedly. They were lied to about how many people who come out of these courses get jobs. They were lied about the average income in these jobs, and they were lied about the resources that the art institutes would give them to facilitate job placement. One of the craziest stories around this involves Serena Williams, of all people, who took a couple fashion classes at the art institutes of Fort Lauderdale. And then in the marketing materials for that particular campus, when they talked about the amount of money you would expect to be able to earn after matriculating at the art institutes, they included Serena Williams' income from winning tennis tournaments and having endorsements as into the average income that you would expect coming out of the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. This was obviously unbelievably deceptive, unbelievably debilitating to people who went to college to get a better career path, found out that their degrees were actually pretty worthless, that employers would screen based on seeing the Art Institute and immediately throw away that resume. And this was really harmed people's lives and livelihoods, wasted years of study only to get a degree that wasn't worth anything. And so what these students said, and this is going back a decade, this is going back to 2014. So these students started saying, I think I was defrauded by my college, and I don't really want to pay for that defrauding. They were still on the hook for these large amounts of student debt from a college that, treated them this shabbily, that used them as victims, essentially. And so they said, we need a way to clear all of this debt. It took 10 years and 3 presidents for them to actually get what happened this week, just 317,000 members of people who studied at the Art Institute, took out student debt. They all got their loans forgiven, including refunds on all the payments that they previously made. It was about $6 billion in refunds. And this was purely a result of organizing. We're 6 months into the Gaza war. The students on the ground have been protesting, signing petitions, going to rallies, going to meetings, and doing whatever they could. And now, to the point of this week, starting encampments. So that's 6 months. This was 10 years. It was a 10-year organizing effort for these Art Institute students to get what they really deserve, which is, if I was defrauded by my college, I shouldn't have to pay to the balance of that action. And so I see somewhat of a parallel here. The point is to keep organizing, that every generation kind of learns that when they support something that is counter to the interests of elites, that elites will use the power of the state to crack down on them or ignore them. And for 10 years, these Art Institute students were ignored. they were ignored by the system. They were told, no, look, you took out a loan, you got to pay the loan. Doesn't matter if you were a fraud victim. And in a similar way, students who are protesting what is going on in Palestine, what is going on in Gaza, were first ignored and then brutally repressed. And I don't think that this is going to stop the protest and the ability for these folks to speak out. But the model is that it took 10 years. It took 10 years for these Art Institute students to get what they deserved. And they were buttressed by a lot of advocates who told them to keep fighting and keep at it. And they finally, moved public opinion where it really wasn't seen. It was seen as absolutely fringe and radical that borrowers of student debt would create, this defense to repayment if they were defrauded by these loans. Even though it sounds intuitive, before 2014, it had never happened before. Very few students had ever successfully navigated the borrower defense to repayment provision that's in the Higher Education Act and actually got their loans discharged. And under Joe Biden, this has happened a few times with Corinthian colleges, which is another shady for-profit college that I've written about on a number of occasions. And DeVry, I believe, or I'm sorry, not DeVry, ITT Tech, those colleges, those for-profit colleges, students got their loans discharged, and now the Art Institutes. They all had to wait in line for years and years and years. The Obama administration did absolutely nothing for these students. The Trump administration did less than nothing for these students. The Biden administration has eventually gotten around to it. But obviously, one of the things that a lot of these students who are protesting the situation in Gaza are against is the Biden administration's, assistance in that war. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up. Of course, student debt itself as an instrument was really born out of the protests of the 1960s. There's a great piece by John Schwartz in The Intercept a couple of years ago explaining this, how the conservative movement really they conceived of student debt because in the 1960s they felt like college was too free. There were all these protests going on against the Vietnam War, and we were creating an educated proletariat, and that's a direct quote, I believe, and that we needed a mechanism to make it harder to attend college, and debt, rather than public financing that made colleges really cheap, was seen as the engine to do that. And so there's a direct correlation between student protests, campus activism, and the situation of precarity that we see ourselves in with respect to students seeking higher education. So that's I think an important part of the picture. Another important part of the picture is really what we're talking about when we're talking about divestment. So a lot of these protests are happening on these very elite private campuses where the endowments are absolutely insane in terms of size. Harvard's endowment is, I believe, $50 billion. That's the amount of money that is in funds at the college's disposal for investment. With the drop in public support for higher education, we have seen these endowments rise up. A lot of the proceeds from endowments are used to fund operations at these colleges. A few high-end schools, it's a significant percentage of operations. In other schools, it's I think the actual average is more like 15%, but there are some schools where it's as high as 60 or 70% of operations funded through the endowment. But there's a trade-off. There's a huge cost to that, and it's not just the fact that inevitably your college is going to be funding really awful things, whether it's companies who do business in Israel, but even well beyond that. I mean, the university endowment is in a large sense responsible for the private equity industry. They pioneered the idea of institutional investment moving into these alternative funds like private equity that buy up companies and use a lot of borrowed money to do so, and load that onto the portfolio company and extract funds from it and leave it, by the side of the road as a hulk. So, it's really the rise of endowments, and they have risen in incredible numbers over the last 20, 25 years. At Ivy League colleges, at private colleges, even at public universities, we've seen these things over a 20, 25-year period grow 1,000%, 1,500%, just incredible numbers. And it has caused the college, the university, to be not just this source of sort of this center of educational fulfillment, but really a center of financial power. And what it does with that power dictates in some ways, where businesses rise and fall. And it also makes these universities beholden to that financial power. It's not a surprise that what we're seeing in terms of these university presidents and what they allege to be sort of cross pressures, some of them are coming from the titans of the business world, people like Bill Ackman, people like Apollo Asset Management and Mark Rowan, and so on and so on. And we're seeing these colleges really become hedge funds with a bunch of classes attached to them. And this is not a good situation for the country. They also, because they're also considered nonprofits, these large endowments are mostly exempt, and they get a bunch of tax subsidies and tax breaks. Now, there is a very small tax on large endowments that was put in 2017 with the Trump tax cuts, actually, but it's really tiny. It's 1.4% tax, and that's on gains, I believe, at these particular colleges. It's an infinitesimal amount. That number should really be much higher. And I think if you think about taxes as a way to sort of order society, the public interest is not served by these runaway endowments that, and some people would say, well, how are you going to fund the university then? What are you going to do? What is your alternative explanation? And I believe that we need to get back to the business of funding public education as a public good, and giving people those opportunities. And that wouldn't reach to a Harvard or Yale or a USC or what have you. But those colleges should be told, well, you can have this endowment, but your tax rate for this endowment is going to be contingent on how many people you allow to enroll at your colleges. There's this artificial scarcity that goes on. Harvard is actually enrolling less students now than they did in, I believe, I'm probably not going to get this number exactly right, but what the hell, it's YouTube. It's something like the 1970s. It's in 50 years, there has been no increase, despite large increases in the population, no increase of who goes to Harvard. They're incredibly selective. They're not using this endowment in any way to lower tuitions or help more students enroll, they're using it, partially to fund operations, but more to just accumulate more and more as these endowments rise and rise, with negative externalities on how society is operating. So I think that we really need to rethink this aspect of higher education finance. I mean, student loan debt is bad enough as one way that we finance higher education. I think these endowments fall into that as well. And obviously, if you don't have an endowment of the size and magnitude that you do currently, then it's a much different situation with regard to these talks about divestment. I mean, it's not just the sums that are in various companies that might have ties to Israel, do business there or whatever, or involved in military operations or whatever it is. It's the magnitude. It's how much a Harvard or a Princeton or a Columbia or a Yale has invested that is so distasteful, and so I really think that that is an unexplored and underexplored, and it's also very difficult to know where these investments are, how much money we're talking about when we're talking about these endowments. There's some vagaries around that. There's actually a good article in Compact magazine by Luigi Zingales and Oliver Hart called "Colleges Owe Students Investment Transparency." You can take a look at that. So that's my 2 cents. I guess 20 minutes worth of 2 cents on this situation. I got a question here from Bart, who says, "Don't we need a new model for higher education, especially in the U.S.?" Absolutely. I mean, that's what this comes down to. I think the Biden administration has talked about making public 2-year colleges or community colleges, or even 4-year public universities free. If you want to go to private university, go ahead, but you're going to have to pay for that. And whereas we're going to give people a public option and have some competition here. That's one way to think about it. There are ways to do it. There are funding streams that can be accessed right now. We spend so much money in tax advantaged accounts, like these 503, I believe, is the part of the tax code. These accounts for investment to help people pay for college. That money that is spent, really, I mean, it's spending through the tax code. The tax advantages of those accounts is so much that it could actually advance millions of people to go to college for free. I got another question here from David. Isn't there a parallel between college endowments and charitable foundations, which is supposed to disgorge a certain amount each year, but yet grow larger and larger? I absolutely agree with that. Philanthropy culture, foundation culture, college endowment culture. What we're talking about here is this giant pool of money. And frankly, pension funds are part of it too. This giant pool of money that is looking for returns, even though they may have other, priorities they're supposed to take on. In case of foundations, to get a certain amount spent every year as part of their ability to access, their status in the tax code. With endowments, their commitment to higher education and supporting student learning. What it really has become is chasing returns, and this inevitably has brought us to a place where investment funds have this overwhelming amount of power in our society, and because of that, they drift from their mission. These various funds, whether we're talking about foundations, charitable foundations, or whether we're talking about university endowments, they have moved away from the public purpose that they were supposed to serve, and move towards a purpose that is more aligned with Wall Street. And so I think that's an unexplored part of the picture with respect to these protests and just more generally. Interestingly, with respect to pension funds, who are constantly investing in private equity, basically using worker money to immiserate workers, which typically are the first ones to see their salaries cut or things like that when a private equity firm takes over the company. The Biden administration has actually initiated a process. I mean, it's pretty early stages to challenge these pension funds to take into account what happens to workers with the investments that they make. So I think that's it's kind of a germinal stage, but I think it's a good idea. Before Matt comes on, I want to bring up something that just sort of came across the wire, and something we're probably going to write about at the Prospect. But I'll give you a little sneak preview here on the Roundup. So NBC News is reporting today that Henry Cuellar is going to be indicted. Cuellar is a congressman from the 28th District of Texas. He is the only anti-abortion congressman on the Democratic side in the U.S. House. He has been under fire for that and survived a very, very close election to a Justice Democrats candidate named Jessica Cisneros in 2022. And when he did need help for this very close primary race, he turned to the Democratic establishment. And at the time, this was when Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn were the leadership in the House, and they all backed him and didn't just back him. I mean, you'd expect the leadership to back an incumbent over a challenger, but they went the extra mile. Clyburn actually did events in San Antonio. We were at one. We reported on it. One of our interns, actually, at the time, Isabel Juice, was at the event where Henry Cuellar appeared with Jim Clyburn in San Antonio, Texas, right before that election. Nancy Pelosi held fundraisers for Cuellar. Steny Hoyer endorsed. Jim Clyburn endorsed. They did a lot of very personal work to push Cuellar barely across the finish line in that primary. And here's the thanks they get. By the way, Henry Cuellar had already had his house raided by the FBI before that 2022 election. It's not like it was unknown that there were some corruption stories swirling around Henry Cuellar at that time. The establishment didn't care. The leadership backed Cuellar to the hilt, ignored those the FBI raid and all the talk of corruption scandals, and now here we are 2 years later, and it looks like Henry Cuellar is going to be indicted. And this year, he had no challenger in his primary. He won with 100% of the vote. He is the Democratic nominee for the 28th District of Texas, and if he's indicted, it's going to be very hard for him to win. That is not a straight up safe Democratic seat. It's close enough that an indicted congressman is going to have a hard time winning that seat. And I don't know exactly what the procedures are if he were to drop out of that race and how they would pick a replacement. But as it stands now, Henry Cuellar is in a tough position politically. And so the Democratic establishment, who, in the name of winning elections, backed Henry Cuellar, they are now in a position of losing that seat and maybe losing the House of Representatives because of that, which is genius. And here we are with Matt Stoller of the American Economic Liberties Project, Matt, how you doing?
I am good. I was on mute.
You were. I saw
Yeah.
that. You've mastered the first step, the most, and maybe the most important step of the weekly roundup, which is get off mute. So I appreciate that. So I was just talking about how Henry Cuellar, after getting the entire Democratic establishment to back him in a super tight race in 2022, is now going to be indicted for corruption and probably, is going to lose that seat for the Democrats and maybe lose the House of Representatives for them. Another genius move by the Democratic establishment there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your leadership. That's right. That's right.
We're going to make that a thing.
We are going to make that a thing. We should probably explain it a little bit. This is something we notice in a lot of, whether it's, these progressive organizations. That's like kind of the first thing that you end up hearing is at the beginning of a speech is thank you for your leadership. And despite leadership being in short supply, that's what you hear. So that's the meme that we're pushing.
As we know, when you have to explain jokes, they're funnier.
They are. That's usually
the key.
That's usually why people enjoy them.
People don't understand the punchline. It's usually their fault.
That's how I take it. That was always my theory of comedy.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
by the way, I'm in the district court at closing arguments for Google.
Yeah,
and you can
excellent.
See that.
So
this is a cafeteria. It's the cafeteria of justice.
Awesome. I don't see David Boies behind you or anybody yet, but if you do, we'll grab them and do a quick interview. Let's talk about that. So you are at the DC District Court, where so I mean, here's the one thing that's interesting about this. So the Google trial happened last year, but the oral arguments, the closing arguments, are happening this week. Right. There was this weird 6-month break that the judge put into the trial, and it's a little bit confounding as to why. But maybe you could talk about that and also tell us, what's going on at this trial that you're seeing.
Sure. So the closing arguments are yesterday and today, and so the trial is still going on. After the investigation started in 2019 or 2018 or 2019. Then the complaint was brought at the end of the Trump administration in 2020, and it finally went to trial in 2023, and now the trial is ending in 2024. Presumably, the judge will write his opinion, and I think he's, I'll tell you how these trials work. But if he finds that Google is liable for monopolization, it's not a criminal case, so you can't say guilty, but whatever. If he finds them guilty of monopolization,
it's YouTube. You can say anything you want, really.
Right.
Then Section 230. That Google's not liable here.
Google will go to jail. No. If he finds Google liable for monopolization, then there's another phase of the trial, which is the remedy phase. What do you do about it?
Right.
I think it took forever, and all these trials take forever, and I don't really know why they take this long. I mean, it's a little bit is that judges are just, they don't always have to take this long. Like, there's actually a Google ad tech trial that's going to go to trial in like 18 months, which is pretty quick. But a lot of it is, show me this, give me your documents. Oh, we can't find any responsive documents, and then a month later, what about these? What about those? And then we wanted to depose your CEO. Oh, he can't meet at this time or that time. And it's like over and over and over, it's like kind of like coordinating with the most annoying friends in the world a billion times. And it takes
the delay is the point. I mean,
but the thing is, the judge could say, stop it, submit the documents or you're going to get fined. And they don't do that, right? They just let it drag on forever.
And that's the point. Like you had Lee Hepner, who's running the Big Tech on Trial blog for you, say that the Microsoft trial, it was about 9 months between the filing of that case and the beginning of the trial. There is a path for a judge to say, yeah, no, stop being stupid. You're not delaying this on purpose, and we're going to move forward. But that's not what happens in the modern day and age.
And there's a lot of stupidity around like pretending that we all have to be neutral or whatever. And it's like, instead of recognizing, okay, Google is clearly a monopoly, we can just accept a whole bunch of stuff. Like, you know, we have to fight over whether there's a general search market versus a vertical search market. Like is Google compete with Yelp? And it's like, no, shut up. Let's stop talking about that and move on, right? Like, that's really the way you should handle these things, because the cost of like doing a billion different depositions and expert reports on whether Google competes with Yelp in general search is delay. And delay is a meaningful cost. There are ways of addressing delay in different areas of law, but judges have gone overboard in trying to figure out, how do I make this seem as fair as possible, even if it is just profoundly unfair to allow Google to escape with no penalty for 4 years, right, while the trial lags on. So
and while not just while the trial drags on, but while innovations happen in the market, we've seen Google make a, you know, the whole point of this trial is that Google's making these deals to make sure search is on phones and browsers and all these devices. Just a couple months ago, Google made a deal with Apple to get its AI product onto iPhones. You know, so
when this trial started, I could be slightly wrong on this, but I don't think I am. When this trial, not trial, when the investigation of Google started, the fundamental technology for generative AI, which is called the transformer, had not yet been invented. Right. That's how bad it is. It's just like takes so long that, and then one of the arguments from the monopolists is, oh well, you know, you're fighting the last war, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, because it takes like a gazillion years. And also, I think the public.
I mean, it's literally part of their strategy. They're saying, you know, actually the search market, it more involves AI now, and so you're arguing over something that's obsolete.
Right.
But they made it obsolete. They made it obsolete by dragging this out for years and years and years. It's part of their strategy.
Well, let's be clear. It's not obsolete. This is still a $300 billion market. It's a big deal.
Well, there's no question.
But I think a lot of this is just, you know, look, part of it is just the one of the themes I think of what we both write about is there's just an unwillingness to govern, right? It's just a lack of, and I think that this is just like the judiciary being unwilling to like lay down a law and just be like, we're going to get this done, we're going to get it done quick, and because justice matters, and justice. So
Judge Mehta's 6-month delay. I've never heard of this in a trial, that you do the trial, you do all the witnesses, and then you wait 6 months and you do the closing argument. I've never seen that before in a trial. I've never seen it on Law and Order, which is how I know trials. So I've never seen it.
It's an article of it goes back to the Magna Carta, and I only say that because it makes me sound fancy. But like the idea that people are owed a timely trial, that the public benefits from a timely trial, is something that even like gangster kings were into. And then, as we know, we should always follow gangster kings and how they think about things. Yeah,
100%. Yeah. So you made some comments about just the sheer sums that are being spent on this thing. You like counted up all the Google
counted
lawyers?
There were 27 lawyers sitting in the Google area. Like there's an area that's roped off for just Google lawyers, and there's 27 lawyers sitting there. There might have been more in the non-reserved spaces, but like I'd say that's probably $1,500 to $2,000 an hour for each lawyer, which is like $50,000 an hour to just like sit there in the courtroom
to do nothing. Yeah,
I mean, they're
all 27.
Working.
It's not a Greek chorus doing the closing argument. It's one guy doing the closing argument. They're not handing it off and doing a relay.
It actually is a Greek chorus. They are singing. That's the weird thing. It's one of the reasons they're not a public audio feed. It's just because they're actually doing it in song. It's weird, but
in iambic pentameter. Yeah,
exactly. The Google defense is they're just sort of like, fuck it, whatever. We don't care anymore. That's why the lawyers are so expensive. They're poets. But no. So what is happening at this phase of the trial? So the first part of the trial is like, so the 3 years of before the trial was just kind of procedural, right? We're going to argue about who we can interview, who we can't, whether they're being obnoxious about giving documents or not, and scheduling and stuff. Then there's the trial where they do all the witnesses testify and reveal documents and go back and forth. Then there was that 6-month break while both sides summarize their argument, the findings of fact, and while the judge basically starts writing his opinion. And
Right.
And essentially goes over like what he thinks about the case. This really is, because it's in the DC District Court, it's under DC Circuit Court law, and the last big case was Microsoft. So he's trying to fit everything into the Microsoft legal framework. And so this last 2 days are basically the judge going to the lawyers and saying, all right, if I'm going to write the opinion this way, how would you do it? If you're going to write it that way, how would you do it? How would you respond to this particular argument or that particular argument? It's kind of like is, you know, it's almost like a writing session for the judge.
Right, right. So would you say that we should expect a verdict quickly then? Because he's had 6 months to think about this, and now he's getting his he's getting his readers to read it. Shouldn't we expect this to happen really quickly then?
Well, quickly in judicial terms is a different.
Yeah.
Means something different.
Right.
Yeah, I think that we will see a decision by this summer, or fall. Which I guess is that quickly. Like, I mean, I don't know. Whatever. Like the thing is merger trials are quick. And the reason is because the companies want to merge, and so.
Right.
The impetus is on the defendant to get the trial over with. So they submit their documents and then they ask the judge to move quickly. This is the opposite. The government wants this done quickly. And so the judge, the defendants drag it out, don't submit documents. And the judge is like, well, it doesn't really matter because there's nothing in the marketplace that's compelling this. The judge in a merger trial, they would want the judge to come out with a decision in like a week or two, or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. And the reason is like, and also the remedy for a merger is pretty easy. It's like yay or nay.
Right.
But
here,
and
maybe we should talk about that. Maybe we should talk about the remedy a little bit. So if Google, and I think there's been a shift in the expectation here, that where the initial consensus was that this case isn't going anywhere, and after the findings of fact and the evidence was presented, there was a lot more from analysts thinking, actually, they may have something here, and Justice Department might win this case. And if they do, what are we thinking about in terms of a remedy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is we don't know, right? So there's so much discretion here for a judge that how he finds that they're liable is meaningful, right? So the essence of the case is that Google controls the search market, because everywhere that you might want to access a Google search or a search engine, Google has bought the default slot. So on every browser, Google pays the maker of the browser to put Google there when you search for something. And like that's actually, they also own Android, right? So they have their own and they make Chrome. So they have their own in places where they distribute Google search. So basically, if you want to get into the search market, you can't, because all of the channels to distribute search are occupied by Google through contract. And so the argument from the DOJ is those contracts are unlawful, right? You should not be able to buy placement, basically supermarket shelf. You shouldn't be able to buy all the supermarket shelf space. Right. Now, Google's argument is we're awesome. People would use us anyway. So why, and then the judge is like, okay, then why are you paying billions of dollars? Why are you paying Apple $20 billion if, they would use you anyway? And Google's like, I don't know.
And that's not an estimated number. That's not an estimated number. That's the real number.
No, that's 2022. So that it's gone up since then, I imagine. But anyway, so if he finds the Google is a monopolist, and I think he will, he basically knows Google's a monopolist. The indications are, it's a monopolist. They make a lot of money by forcing prices upward through their market power. However, I think what he's struggling with is because he's kind of a teacher's pet, right? Like he wants a gold star. And so he's trying to figure out like, how do I fit what is very obvious into this annoying legal framework?
Right.
And
Right.
and that, you know, will he do that? I don't know. Maybe he'll be like, well, the foreclosure coverage is not 50%, and therefore neener. Who knows? Right.
Right.
It's just a lot
There's
of
like
discretion.
a good way. There's a good resolution there, and there's a bad one. So like maybe a bad resolution would be, well, now everybody gets a choice screen.
Yes,
So
you could say those.
up,
He could say the contracts are void, and you can't. Google can't pay for this slot. Or he could say Google can have a contract, but they have to do a revenue share, and they have to allow the OEM or Apple to make a decision about defaults themselves, right? So, which would probably not change much. Or he could say Google's monopoly power for 15 years is the result of this unlawful behavior. Therefore, all of the data that they have is unlawfully gained, and they should not be the only ones to be able to use this data because it was unlawfully gained. And so they're going to have to open up their data stores to rivals to train AI engines or whatever it is. There could also be structural separation, saying, I don't think Google should be able to own Android. It's just too much of a conflict of interest there. If it's
or Chrome or
Chrome
separate the search from the browsers and devices that they're
open up the basic idea is
that would be a parallel to the Microsoft case, right?
It would be.
That was the remedy there, or the attempted remedy.
How do you open up it's funny because there were two remedies in the Microsoft case. There was the one that was proposed and the judge said, yeah, let's break them up, and then he was overruled. And the second remedy was actually, it was effective, but it was an interoperability remedy. It was behavioral.
Right.
So the question here is, like, how do you open up the market? And I think that, like, Judge Mehta is if the way he finds Google has engaged in unlawful behavior to monopolize the market will indicate how he thinks the market needs to be opened up. So is it just changing the contracts? Is it voiding the contracts? Is it breaking up Google? Is it giving access to data? Is it all of the above? I don't know. It's also obvious that whatever happens is going to go to appeal. And it's going to go to appeal in the DC Circuit Court. Who knows? There's different judges some of them are very good on antitrust and some of them are not. And then it'll probably go to the Supreme Court. I don't know if the Supreme Court will take it, but you know, it's a major deal. It's the first major monopolization case from the DOJ in 20 years. It's the first big tech case from the DOJ or from either, you know, that's really close to resolution. So, you know, it's a big deal. It's also part of context here is the Epic Games versus Google case just concluded. That was about app stores. And there's an Apple v. Epic Games, which is also about app stores, and that involves Android and Google Play. And then there's another Google case involving just the advertising technology itself that's starting. So it's like there's all of this stuff happening to address this one tiny company, Google. And you know, I don't know. It seems unfair to them. All they want to do is organize the world's information. Which, by the way, in retrospect, that's like sociopathic. To be like, what do you want to do? Oh, we're going to organize the world's information. And like all of us were like, at the time, we're like, oh, that sounds great.
That sounds really noble.
And then you're like, who could not like organizing the world's information? And as it turns out, you're like, that's like, you know, you're dating
Alexander the Great. Didn't Alexander the Great want to do that? Like, isn't the library at Alexandria trying to organize the world's information? Shouldn't we have known?
No, it's just like one day you wake up and you notice your friend's like wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever is like a monster. You're like, oh, there were red flags. Like, you know, I don't know what they were, but like, oh yeah, they were like talking about their days when they were like a drug dealer. I didn't realize. Oh yeah, they did like work.
Maybe that behavior was still latent. So
I didn't. Oh my God, he does work at Goldman. I do remember that.
Right. Oh shit.
Oh my God. He was constantly trying to get us to go see Hamilton.
Right. All right.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about something you wrote about last week that had an interesting twist this week. So you wrote about the oil companies in the United States and their real collusion, really, with
Right.
the dominant group of oil-producing countries. And then the FTC this week essentially said Matt Stoller's right. And
well, that actually
what they said
is the American prospect from 2022 is right.
There you go.
But nobody remembers that.
Right about
so I just took credit.
Did write about that. But anyway, let's talk about it. So what you were talking about is there's this whole group of oil producing nations called OPEC, and they work in concert like a cartel to raise or lower the level of production of oil to set prices, basically, right? And that was something that they had pretty much unilateral power to do until the rise of the fracking boom in the United States. And suddenly we could get oil where we couldn't get it before, and we became what is known as the swing producer for the world. So how much oil that the U.S. could drill depends, it determines price in a major way. What happened? I mean, why don't you take it from there? What happened after the pandemic is sort of the instructive point here.
Right. So, everybody knows Saudi Arabia. It's powerful because they have a bunch of oil, and as it turns out, so there's a new way of drilling for oil, called fracking. And the thing about fracking that's different is that you can spin up a well in 2 weeks. Right? It's as close to oil on demand as there is. And so that means is when you have price spikes or you have price drops, you can just spin it up or spin it down really quickly. And that makes it very powerful because you can, Saudi Arabia is the only other country that can do that because they have so much excess reserves. So what effectively happened is price leadership, which is the ability to set the price, moved away from Saudi Arabia from 2014 to 2016, as you just noted. Then in 2017, and importantly, OPEC isn't just like a cartel; it is a cartel,
right?
And it just you can't reach them because they're foreign governments, and so the antitrust laws don't apply to foreign governments; they apply to companies. Well, as it turns out, American oil companies are companies, and so they're not allowed to price fix, even if other entities in the market are, like OPEC. Well, in 2017, a bunch of these companies were like, "Hey, we're tired of lower prices. We don't like this price war. Maybe it would be easier to work with OPEC instead of compete with them, even though that's against the law." And so they sat down at this. There's a conference called Sierra Week where oil men and Arab princes rub shoulders.
It's like in
and
Houston,
they sat down.
Yeah.
And they sat down at a dinner, and we're like, "Hey, we're not so different, you and I."
right.
And it was like the Nigerian oil minister and the Ecuadorian oil minister and various other OPEC members, and that sparked a series of meetings and communications. And so I got this from a class action law firm in Missouri and they're very good and they know oil. So I just basically wrote up their complaint. And what the complaint said is, look, these guys joined OPEC and there's all of this data and lots of quotes showing it. At a certain point, the CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources, which is one of these new frackers, is a guy named Scott Sheffield. He said, I kind of think OPEC is going to cut production in around 90 days. And 87 days later, they cut production. Right. It was like a joke how but they was obviously talking, and they would say things like, they would openly threaten companies that were drilling for more oil. They would say, we really need to cut production in tandem with OPEC. And that's the stuff they were saying publicly.
And so here's where this then gets interesting. So it turns out, in addition to not investing to keep price going up, these fracking companies started to merge with one another in major ways. And Pioneer Resources, who you just mentioned, attempted to have an acquisition. They were going to be acquired by ExxonMobil. And the FTC was looking at this case.
Well, wait, we have to get to the price spike, because that's important, right? Before we get to the mergers, right? So what happens is, they join OPEC, and then in 2021, there's a massive price spike because of the COVID reopening. And then there's another price spike because of Ukraine. And what would have happened during the price war is the oil producers would have turned up the production to take advantage of the price spike, driving the price down, but making some money in the process.
And they adamantly refused to.
And they refused to do that. And they were open about it. And so
publicly, I mean, our 2022 piece quotes a number of these executives saying, I don't care if it goes to 100. I don't care if it goes to 150 a barrel. I don't care if it goes to 200 a barrel. I'm not investing. I mean, they were very, very public about it.
And it was weird because why wouldn't you invest to take market share and make more money? And the answer, and so like there were sort of implications of cartelized behavior, but nobody kind of had the evidence of it. And Biden was like, you guys are terrible. What are you doing? And then they were like, well, it's your fault for not letting us get access to public lands. Even as they were saying, investors were like, we're not investing because we like high prices. And what turns out what happened, so as you noted, there's a series of mergers that started last year, and Exxon Pioneer, the FTC was investigating it. So I wrote up this complaint on Sunday, and then yesterday the FTC came out with a bunch of documents where they were like, as it turns out, Scott Sheffield, CEO of Pioneer, was one of the key people who was talking, lots of text messages and email, hundreds of text messages and emails with OPEC members to coordinate production, and they let the merger go through, because they don't think the merger there's not enough market power there to raise prices. But the condition was this guy, Scott Sheffield, who was a pioneer in fracking, can't be anywhere near the company. He can't be on the board. He can't be an advisor. And so he was
the CEO of the company that was being acquired. Now, normally in these situations, the CEO gets a bunch of money to go away. Is there some sort of golden parachute there for Sheffield?
I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there is, because life isn't fair.
Right.
But
I mean, he certainly wanted to be still part of the business. He wanted to be, whether it was some sort of executive position at Exxon or on the company board. He wanted that.
This is a huge, like, one of the nice things about this. So I wish they had challenged the merger, but challenging a merger in a Texas courtroom when the whole industry wants mergers and the Republicans are really hostile is a difficult proposition on a theory where they're going to have 3% of the market. It's a tough road to hoe. So I understand why they didn't. But this is actually, like, when you punish an executive, I mean, that's a big deal. And he might get a bunch of money. He probably has a bunch of money. It doesn't matter. They're just keeping score at this point. But what it is it embarrasses him publicly. And he will forever be known as the person who engaged in a massive price fixing conspiracy. And that is something he will never forget. And no one in the industry is going to want to be like Sheffield. Now, I hope the DOJ comes and just arrests him for price fixing. That is the only, because I'm going to publish a piece today on this. And it turns out he said that Sheffield said at a certain point that that frackers lowered the price of oil by $20 to $30 a barrel, which means that when they stop doing that, it increases the price of oil by $20 to $30 a barrel.
Right.
Since we consume $7 billion of oil a year in the US, that's between $150 to $200 billion, probably more in 2022. It's not totally clear. But if you look at the total price hike or the total increase of profits in 2021, right, in 2022, that was a significant contributor to inflation. So 60% of the increases of inflation were just profit. As it turns out, about 25% of the increases in inflation is due to this one oil price fixing scheme.
Right.
Like,
and what
that is insane. It's $500 to $1,000 a person. Like,
and what we know, and why is it so much? Because transportation is a function of pretty much the price of every good that is put across the country, and they all need oil at this point in order to move those things through different highways and byways.
It's a 7 billion barrels of oil, $20 to $30 a barrel, divided into a number of people, and like that's about as much math as I can do.
In the beginnings of this inflation cycle, oil prices were a major driver of it. Like, we know that. We know like how much money they contributed, how much percentage they contributed to inflation. And we had these armchair economists saying that there is no such thing as greedflation, that their corporate greed could not possibly be a factor in this inflation cycle. It's all about federal spending. And here we have one dude changing text messages with emirs in Saudi Arabia that is responsible maybe for a quarter of all inflation in that period.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I mean, I'm guessing it's probably more than him. I think there's other people who were.
I'm going to blame him. I'm going to blame.
Okay, it's just one dude.
Why not? It's one dude in Texas.
Yeah, and it's not the Jews either.
I'm going to end right there. Matt, thank you so much.
No, it's a Texas oil guy. Like, the conspiracy theories are true, and this is like, it is big oil.
Anyway, yeah, we are actually out of time. So very much.
I feel like I probably shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that because it's like a time that's pretty. I just can't help myself because those of you who don't know, Dave and I are both Jewish, and it is a common thing to do among Jews to joke about like Jewish conspiracies. So that's where the joke is coming from. Which, again, if you have to explain it, it's funny. But I just think it's like funny here because the whole point of this the whole point here is that like this is a giant conspiracy. It was orchestrated by a small number of people. It was economy world changing, right. And it was economy reshaping. And so, like, there's like a reason people are looking for conspiracies, right? But this is an actual one, right?
If I can sum this up for you and put it in your words and quote you in saying this, QAnon is right. I think that's basically what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is that QAnon is no more wrong than most economists.
There you go. Perfect. All right, great. All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you
for
being here. Yeah, take care. Thanks everybody for being here on the weekly roundup. We're going to put this on the website, and we'll be here next week, 12:30 Eastern. Thanks. Bye.